So welcome to the Real Football Show. Well, it's a real football show, but you understand, foot. But well, that's a good start today. It's our maiden episode of the podcast. Well, if everything stays the same, it should be me. I'm Ryan Lam, and we have Anna Middleton with us. We do soccer segments. If you watch Penn State Sports Night, which this thing would be hosted on. So, say hello, Anna.
Hi, everybody.
All right, today we have a special guest with us. We're talking about having someone very, very special. But then this type of special we have the Daily Collegian women's soccer reporter, also my partner in crime, Madeline Lapreziosa. Say hi.
Hello.
So yeah, that's a very, very welcoming introduction. So, let's...
Whoa, Ryan, I'm not your partner in crime?
You are, but the stuff we talk and some of the stuff we went through together forged a different type of relationship, and let's not touch on that in this public platform. Okay, so, let's get started. Of course, three of us are here today on this fine Sunday, and, let's talk about Penn State women's soccer to start. Program very close to, all three of us, to some capacity, being around it for the whole season. So, I mean, the first thing I want to talk about here is, is the season a success or a failure? I know, Madeline, you recently did something about that, kind of give your take, your opinion. So can you turn your however many word article into a verbal explanation of what this team has done and evolve kind of and turn into, what's next for the team?
Yeah, so it's really hard to describe whether the season was a success or a failure. So I feel like it's kind of in that middle ground, that gray area between, and mainly because at the beginning of the season, the team was ranked 6th in the nation, coming in with the top recruiting class as well. So the expectations were pretty high, yet they went on a losing streak. They lost 3 in a row at home for the first time in program history, and then fell from number 6 to 8 to 23, and then out of the top 25 for most of the season. And so that's why the season didn't really live up to those high expectations, but it can't be considered a complete failure because they eventually found their stride. That lack of chemistry that was partially caused by injuries, it sort of sorted itself out, and they kind of settled on a starting lineup and were able to put together an 11-game winning streak before eventually losing in the round of 16 of the NCAA tournament to a pretty good Stanford team. But some of the highlights also include winning the Big Ten tournament, especially that championship match against Michigan, going down 1-0 and then coming back in the final minutes and winning that trophy. That was pretty exciting for the team. And then also that second round game against Arizona when they were down 2-0 with 30 minutes remaining, and then Sam Coffey just put the team on her back, scored 2 goals, had an assist, and that was, in my opinion, probably the highlight of the season.
I mean, if you look at this, I think this is a point that, even in just random conversations we've had that I've made, or what some of you have even made as well, is that it's kind of like a culmination of everything. Of course, the schedule was hard to start, and it kind of got easier when you look at the teams. They're kind of a little bit more shaky toward the end in the winning streak, but you can't discredit them for coming back and having that effort to continue rolling on this season. But then also when you think about matches like Michigan, Stony Brook, Arizona, those toward the end when it got really tough for the team, if they haven't gone through that 6-6-1, everything is a 6-6-1, 3 straight losses at home, everything kind of brought together. If they haven't gone through that patch, they probably would not be able to have that resiliency, to have that push for them to come back in those dire situations, especially in the games against Michigan and also Arizona. Coach Sambach literally said it's one of her most memorable experience in the tournament. Maybe, yeah, not used to being down kind of that fashion, but then the team just came back, and that credit of course goes to the team, the coaching staff, but then also they endured that early kind of shaky start and got a lot of lessons from that as well.
Going off of what she said and how she thinks the season went okay, I actually think the season went pretty well near the end because they did have the 11-game winning streak, and their team is mostly young. Like, they have young players. They needed to gel together. And if they didn't play Stanford in the Sweet 16, who knows? Maybe they would have made it all the way to the national championship. You know what I mean? Like, Stanford is an incredibly talented team. And I think Penn State finally got in the groove and finally understood, like, where the players want the ball, how, like, every player runs and everything. And I think it was a great season.
Yeah, kind of alluding to that, like on an occasion I talked with Sam Coffey actually. She talked about one thing that the team really stressed on, especially in that kind of like offensive stretch. It's KYP. They say like knowing your players, and that's something that really helped the team. When you look at like, jokingly, I've said a lot like on my Twitter or on whatever. This team gave me like Man United flashbacks from like Louis van Gaal or David Moyes or even some Jose Mourinho days, just because like it just lacked something. Like, it's not crisp. It's not like your Guardiola style of soccer, your Emery when he was at Sevilla and he was actually a good coach type of soccer. Like, it's just like pass maybe a few inches off, pass into space instead of onto the foot, or passes like, through through balls that are a little bit ambitious and a little bit of also impatience in general. But then like after getting that process, and like college soccer is always hard. College sports is always hard because it kind of like change like the roster changes. Like, this team has two freshmen being in the midfield and in the front three as well with Linehan and Corey Dyke. Also, Sam Coffey's a brand new player. Schlegel has dabbled into playing, but also not being on the squad the first year. So it's kind of like a learning process having new pieces. And they did the KYP process. It was a little bit painful, but then, hey, they came out of it being better. And now they have that core six with the likes of even Shane Moyer and Christian Schnurr going into next season.
Going into next season, you were mentioning on all the young players they have. I think we have to touch base on the defense. We have to touch base on the defense because they're losing almost all of their defense. Without Caitlin Hayslip, everyone else is leaving. So,
Hot takes.
yeah.
You go.
Well, I think that is something that could potentially be something that they struggle on. You know, you won't have Kaylee Reel back there, and so Caitlin Hayslip is all by herself. But fortunately, Kate Wiesner will be back, and I think probably Kat Asman will be in goal. And at outside back on the right side, that's another potential question. I know that Devin Olive can play outside back. She started there kind of in preseason, but then played mostly on the wing when she subbed into games. So it'll be interesting to see what happens.
I mean, also just like you said, there are question marks, but then when we think about it, Penn State has always been able to recruit solid recruiting classes, if not like consistently top 10. Basically, for the past, ever since like Tim Wassel was here, he became the recruiting coordinator, and toward the latter part of this decade, it's basically consistently top 10. So when you look at the recruits, like, of course, the 2015 class was big with Kaylee Rio, Ellie Jean, like you talked about. Amanda Dennis came in 16, Swearrow came in 16, I want to say. So like there's bound to be this type of like special game changing player coming in. Last year it was Kate Wiesner. Kate Wiesner as the as the left back was the number one recruit in the country. So let's see, of course, recruiting information in the especially in the women's soccer world, call it collegiately. It's not like football where people have someone like consistently monitoring it and talking about scholarships and stuff like that and how they're allocated. But then there could very possibly be someone like Weezer's caliber, someone like I say Kaylee Reel's caliber coming in, and of course it's gonna be new, it's gonna take time, but then team the team might not be as like shaky, but there are the goalkeeper part I kind of want to talk about as well. Julia Dahl might be an option. She made the U20s team. I know like the timing is a little bit weird just because like U20 basically college, and everyone's like at least the upper echelon type of players are all participating in the College Cup. So that's probably why Julia got selected to the U20 setup. Apart from well, it's like being there, being through the younger setup, especially. But then I feel like, especially as to like we've talked about in this situation, like all, like conversations with you guys that like, oh my god, what were we gonna do? But like there is still something to look forward to, especially with the recruits and what they're able to do, and that's how you kind of build college programs, getting good recruits and kind of like develop them. Of course, timeline might say otherwise.
I think what also should be noted is the experience. If you bring in someone new, yes, they may be a top ranked recruit, but they aren't going to have any experience. And that's something that we needed. Shelby Craft went in a few times at center back, and I think she's a great player and everything, but she doesn't have the experience. Playing Division One college soccer, it's different pace, different level. Like it takes time, no matter how good of a recruit or top ranked you are.
Especially like looking at position like defender, when when you screw up, it's basically a very high high opportunity, high dare I say expected goal chance allowed in that scenario, and that might be something that are people are worried about, especially like defense basically is your last line, literally last line of defense, right? So they have to kind of it's better to have experience back there, but then like sometimes your hands force and well, not much could be done. So let's shift away from the defense and kind of talk about how this team continuously could move forward, especially in the offense. Of course, they solved all their problems kind of on the fly, and that's how you do it in every single sport, basically. Every team, not every team's going to be perfect. They have to kind of push on and think about stuff and think about how they could address it. This team did. For you, Madeline, how do you think that offense is going to shape up next season with that core, but then also options like Shea Moyer, Kristen Schnur, that type of like experience, and also like locker room leader type of players coming back in.
Yeah, I think it's great that that whole midfield and front line for Penn State didn't have any seniors this year. So having everybody come back, especially Coffee, Abello, Taliaferri, they're going to be seniors next year. That's going to be great just for that experience and that leadership in the attack. And then also you'll see some of the freshmen from this year, Linehan, Schlegel. They're going to be they'll have a year of experience under their belts, and I think they'll be even better and even more impactful in that attacking chemistry next year. Um, yeah, it'll be really interesting to see how they can kind of capitalize on what they did this year. Obviously, Linehan was part of the Big Ten All Freshman team, and Schlegel was Big Ten Forward of the Year. So they obviously started out really well, and they have years ahead of them. So it'll be great to see how they can kind of build on that success they've already had.
What about you, Anna? Who you have as that like kind of special player in that setup, especially now that well everyone's kind of on the same page right now.
I would have to say I like two players the best out of the team. Corey Dyke at holding midfield. She took over. I want to say,
Emily Ogles, definitely.
yeah, but also she doesn't get as much credit as I think she should. She always connects a pass. I've never seen her not connect a pass, to be honest. She's just good at that. And she's patient on the defense, and I think that's what you need as a holding midfielder because you're not the last line of defense. So as long as you can hold them off, I think that's what you ask for as a player. And then moving up into the forward, Ali Schlegel is amazing in my opinion. I think she had 13 goals and 7 assists. Is that
Correct,
right?
yeah.
Yeah. And I think without her getting those goals into the net, like
Just being the finisher.
I
Yeah.
don't know if there would be a player on the Penn State women's team that would be able to finish the goals in the dire need. Sam Coffey is really good, 100%, but she can't do it all. And I think teams would be able to mark her and everything. And so the fact that we have Schlegel to score and Sam Coffey makes a difference.
All right, so I guess we've kind of moved into the Player of the Year candidates as well. So Anna's got Ali Schlegel coming in. Who do you got, Madeline?
Definitely Sam Coffey. I mean, she came up huge towards the end of the season, especially just in those come from behind victories. Obviously, we talked about the game against Arizona, and then even the game against Stony Brook. Just she was everywhere, all over the pitch with goals, assists. She had 11 goals and 10 assists on the season. So I mean, she was the biggest addition, but also the biggest player on this team this season.
All right, so you kind of stole my pick there. I picked Sam Coffey, the show as well, but like just I echo a lot of things that you say, especially with her being like basically the complete offensive player, and she's really selfless as well. Of course, you've seen those goals against Arizona. She could score those solo goals on her own and be the game changer herself. But then also there are scenarios like well, she could put in a dead ball like no one else on the team's wall, especially in the corners. She could use both of her feet to create, and also just like she has that passing vision that you kind of have to hone. And the thing I was glad to see is that she moved from a 10 to an 8. So like the area she's responsible for is bigger, and also she's dropping back deeper. That's probably like a Segundo Volante role, or kind of like a advanced playmaker, if you will. And in that scenario, she could still find the passes because when you're at the 10, when you're at the attacking midfielder role, you just basically play balls like toward the wings or through balls straight through and as the creative hub. While at the 8, you have to kind of like distribute more. And I think the first goal against Arizona, that's a very good example of her putting the ball in and then Ali Schlegel tapping it in to the back of the net.
I think that goal was the best play of the season.
I remember Ali Schlegel saying that Sam's pass was actually pretty bad, but like you like if
She had
you're
to she had to dive to get it. She barely got a toe on it, and then she didn't even know she scored originally because she was on the ground.
yeah, she would like okay, if you have an idea, Ali Schlegel, Sam Coffey, probably the best buddies on the team as well. So that might be a little bit sarcastic from her end, but then I feel like that's a very good example of how Coffee could create, even despite the deeper role and requiring more out of her. But then other players, of course, you talk about most valuable player, could be Kaylee Real because like we've probably had conversations about this. I'm sorry I keep referring to the conversations like the three of us had outside, but that's probably all we do. But then like if that back line lacks Kaylee Real and the ground she could cover and the stability she provides as a leader, like the team is very screwed.
I think the biggest part that you said is the leader part. She's been a leader on this team for almost 5 years now.
Yeah.
You can't just replace that within a few months of preseason if someone new comes in.
Yeah, especially when you talk about it, like not to make this a dig, but then when Carrier Bello moved back up, Dambach is still tinkering the defense a little bit. So it starts like, Ellie Jeans has always been a right back of the team, and then Laura Suero at the left. Kaylee Reel's always the left center back, and then they will have Caitlin Hayslip at the right center back, and that kind of got moved around because Dambach looks for a little bit more defensive stability on the right side. So they moved Suero to the right, and then they moved Ellie Jean to the left. And then with Ellie Jean going up, sometimes Kaylee Reel's only in charge of the whole left side of the pitch, and she could do it. That's the thing. That's how special she is. And that's how much trust the team, especially the coaching staff, have on a player like Kaylee Reel. Of course, Amanda Dennis also has a very good season and goal, especially to close it. But, I think you have some Kaylee thoughts as well, Madeline.
Yeah, I mean, you definitely saw the inexperience from Caitlin Hayslip, especially when she was kind of thrust into that starting role when Wiesner went out, and then Suero was moved to outside back. So yeah, I think just having Real next to her probably helped a lot. She definitely improved towards the end of the season, so I think going forward for Hayslip, it'll be interesting to see how she can kind of maybe improve on what she did this season and how she'll kind of play without having someone like Kaylee Real next to her.
Yep. All right, so we've kind of gone through some Player of the Year stuff. I think this is pretty much it for Penn State soccer, unless
Are we going to talk about the College Cup at all?
We are going to talk about it, but any other thoughts for the team? How this is going? Of course, losing some players, being around some of the players, the flex, but well. All right, so let's talk about other women's soccer stuff and the college stratosphere, I guess. Before we go into College Cup, of course, the marquee event of this weekend, screw college football, bowl reviews and whatever.
Penn State may be playing Memphis in the Cotton Bowl. We are not sure yet.
Let's not make guesses on that right now, but then okay, let's talk about other women's soccer stuff in in college. So, first thing, something that Madeline has brought into my attention is that there's been talks of having a 2-semester season. So, you want to kind of explain how the extent of it is? Of course, it's just a suggestion, but you want to care to kind of explain how this is or your vision of how this could work.
Yeah, well, so there's been talk about how potentially the season would be both in the fall and the spring, and that kind of fixes the issue of having to play Thursday, Sunday, or Friday, Sunday games, which has been kind of linked to how players get injuries or just general fatigue in games. So I think that would be a really good idea. I know some high-profile coaches have already supported it, and just because, like, you need to give the players time to rest, and I think even professional players don't play 2 games in like 3 days, so why would we expect college players to do the same? So I think that it's definitely something that should be a reality, just because, you know, you want the players to kind of have that time to kind of recuperate after games and just be able to perform at their highest level.
All right, Anna, what you got?
I personally think
As a former Division II soccer player,
with playing soccer, I had to play 2 games a week, maybe even 3 games a week if it was like a weird like Thursday game.
like a Saturday, Thursday, Sunday, something like that, maybe.
Yeah, something along those lines. I think that it should stay 1 season. Yes, it's tiring. Yes, it's a lot. But if you make it all year round, I know when Emily Ogle came back for practices sometimes, she used to say, she was like, I'm happy that I have a break. Like, you need a break. And I think if you made it all year round, the girls would never get the break. They would never have a time where they're just students, really. And it would affect them in the long run. Maybe not 1 season, but in the long run, they would get burnt out faster.
I definitely see the point, especially for like college sports. It's really, really separated into fall sports, spring sport, and then while those who kind of lap in between, like stuff like basketball. But then I understand, like, just thinking about it, I think I agree with Madeline more in this situation where it's like, even for Europa League, right? It's like, what, Thursday, Sunday? So Europa League games are on Thursday, and then they usually let them play the league game on Sunday, and that's like, what, every 2-3 weeks max. Like the closest interval is every like 2 or 3 weeks. When you get into knockout stages, those could be like a month separating those teams. And of course, like, the argument could come out like, oh, college soccer is not as competitive or like physically tiring as what we consider as professional soccer. I understand that point could come out as well. But then it's just like, I feel like if the pros can do that, I don't understand like why we're enforcing college students, especially some of them, well, still growing. They're still growing teenagers, and well, early 20s maybe, and like that could be a possible problem long term, especially with like just looking at injury statistics across different sports. Like serious injuries, like, torn ACLs and stuff like that, has been on the rise in every single sport, especially with the athleticism the players possess right now. And like, I know we should not be joking about this, but this team has a like basically season long torn ACL ish injury first team with the players that have gone out for the season with serious injuries.
I think that's just playing the sport of soccer, though, in general. I mean, I know teams all over that have torn ACLs. It's just the game of soccer. And then going off of moving it into, like, it's too strenuous for the girls to have one season. Penn State women's soccer does a great job at giving players a break. Within 1 week, we could have 2 days off, or you just lift. Well, having 2 days off, it gives your body 48 hours to recuperate. That's more than enough time. Now, I can't speak for other programs who may not be doing that, but the Penn State women's soccer program does a great job of giving their players time to recuperate.
This is exactly the insight I'm looking for with bringing you guys on. So, kind of like, I just want to make a final point toward that. We could of course, it's a different setup, especially in the winter. It's tougher to play. But then it could kind of like mimic the idea of the Southern Hemisphere leagues. So, for example, the Argentinian or the Brazilian leagues, they play a very distinct spring league and fall league, and both leagues kind of matter. And toward the end, they kind of like all like group together as like, you know, they don't have playoffs because, well, playoffs is a very distinctively American thing, I must say. But then like making both of the seasons matter, but then also it doesn't really work in the Northern Hemisphere because of the winter, and then our semesters go from fall, spring usually, unless you're early enroll, so the eligibility issue could come up as well. But then it's something that, well, was thrown out there, something that was being asked to the coaches in the College Cup during media avail, and let's see if there are like talks of them. Like, it's a very early idea, but let's see if the talks of them pick up. Maybe we could address them again, or just like look at what the coaches have to say. So now we could move on finally to College Cup, and well, Friday was semifinal, 2 games. UNC versus Washington State. UNC won that game, and then of course, well, Stanford, UCLA. I remember Chris Henderson said that there was like a 35 to 40% of UCLA upsetting, well, the runaway #1 team in the nation, Stanford. Now, well, they looked good to start. Not going to lie, they looked good to start, but then Stanford, well, gave them a beating, like Stanford can only do. So Anna, I want you to start. Talk about UNC because, well, you're pretty adamant about that program winning and having the success they have, of course. 22 College Cups. Remember talking about that graphic that pulled up on our TV when I was watching the game. So, well, what do you see, like, of course, what do you think about that UNC result, and what does it say in like a very traditional matchup, a traditional powerhouse blue chip team against a team that got on a hot run in the NCAA tournament, 1-game knockout style?
Well, I would first like to say that, Ryan, I had my picks right. I said last week on our soccer segment, I said it was going to be UNC and Stanford in the final. So I'd just like to say I was right in that part. But UNC, I've always loved UNC. I think UNC has an excellent program. And just the way they do it, like I follow them on social media and I've been following the team and everything. And they look like they're having fun and they're enjoying it. And they want to win. They want to do it for themselves. And also something that I would like to note is I think UNC, if not, one of you guys can touch base on this, but do they have a lot of international players on their team right now?
I don't think so. But they have a lot of American talent. Right?
Yeah, they definitely do. I believe there are 3 British players on the team. But yeah, definitely a lot of young Americans. Obviously, Emily Fox, who just recently tore her ACL, which is unfortunate. But there's also Brianna Pinto, who is an up-and-coming U.S. talent. So definitely, of course, along with Stanford, you'll definitely see some future U.S. internationals, just like there have been so many in the past coming from North Carolina.
Macy Bell as well. Like, I remember in the broadcast, they were talking about how the coach never really starts true freshmen, in the first game of the season, even in first preseason scrimmage. And, well, he's been here for, like, what, 40-something years now? The UNC
very, very long time.
Yeah,
yes.
it's like he's almost like a paternal figure if you could compare it on that scale. And Macy Bell was the first to do it, and she has a very, very bright future ahead of her. So, do we want to move on to Stanford? Because I know you guys have takes about Stanford.
I think we have to move on to Stanford just because we all know Stanford is the powerhouse.
Yeah, but explain. Care to explain or like kind of talk about it in their tournament run?
So I think Stanford's an interesting pick just because they are 22-1 this season. So 23-1 now that they beat UCLA. But I think it's interesting. One part is Stanford only lost to Pepperdine University this year, and it was in early September. And I think that just shows, like, even though they're not undefeated, they probably should be. Like, it was probably a fluke game how they beat them. But Stanford just has incredible players. I don't remember who it was, but they beat a team 14-0.
15-0. Right?
15?
Is it 15?
Oh, my
Prairie
gosh.
View A&M. They were in the NCAA basketball tournament. I just remember it because they have a weird name.
15-0. One thing that I don't like about Stanford, though, is the fact that they beat a team 15-0. Like, everybody knows you are a powerhouse. Everybody knows you're talented. You did not need to do that.
So you just want them to chill the F out?
I just would like them to be respectful in the sense that if you're winning 8-0, like, you know you're not coming back. Like, you know you got the lead. You don't have to win 15-0. But that's just my hot take for the day.
The funny thing is that I think it's a little bit more disrespectful if you take your foot off the gas pedal, because like as an opponent who, suffering a great defeat in that case, I feel like it's more disrespectful for them to chill out and like back off and kind of like play around, pass the ball around, and call it a game. I think that's a little bit worse. It's not like basketball where like in the last few possessions it's fine, but when we're talking about basically demolition like that, I think it's a little bit more respectful to the opposing team if you continue to compete at the level that you're supposed to compete, even with your bench players coming into play. However, let's talk about that front line, because that's what makes this team special. You're looking at players like, obviously, Katerina Macario, one of the loudest names, biggest names in soccer, and talk about Sophia Smith as well, and Madison Haley. Those three players have led the line for Stanford. Madeline, I'm sure you have a lot of takes and ideas and points you want to talk about Stanford, or, again, recent conversations. So what's the hot take you have for us? Or lukewarm take. I don't mind. We just need takes around here.
Well, of course, you can't talk about Stanford without talking about Katerina Macario. Of course, she was the reigning Mac Herman Trophy winner and a finalist again this year. I mean, it's hard to imagine her not winning it again for a second straight year. I think she has like 32 goals and 23 assists, something crazy like that. And then, of course, Sophia Smith, who scored a hat trick against UCLA in the semifinal. I mean, there's just talent everywhere, all over the Stanford team. And, I mean, of course, players like Macario and Smith, I mean, I find it hard to imagine that you won't see them playing for the U.S. women's national team in a few years.
Brazil, but go on.
Yeah, I mean, I think she said she wanted to play for the U.S., and I think she has to get, like, some citizenship things sorted out, but, I mean, I'm pretty confident she'll be there.
Like, it's kind of, I guess, is it kind of funny that when you looked at that front line with all of those players, Sam Tran, a player of her caliber, has to sit on the bench because they have Macario, Haley, and also Sophia Smith. But then, of course, that UCLA game was kind of funny because, we're talking about that on an instant, and, the goalkeeper seemingly didn't really show up, with some of the goals being a little bit questionable, like, not tipping it over the bar, or letting it in front post, or some deflections and stuff like that. Very briefly touch on UCLA before we could go back to that Stanford performance. Jessie Fleming. And Jessie Fleming is one of the Mac Herman Trophy finalists. People argue, should it be Jessie Fleming or Ashley Sanchez? Do you guys have any thoughts on that, especially with, Sanchez being part of what's considered the future home of the United States women's national team. I don't know if she still is, but well,
Well, at 17 years old, Ashley Sanchez was part of that U20 Women's World Cup team in 2016, along with Mallory Pugh, of course, and they were kind of both considered that those two up and coming stars for the national team. And of course, Pugh didn't go to college, so now she's playing with the Washington Spirit in the NWSL, and then Sanchez is still in college with UCLA. So I mean, I'm not sure how that's affected her development, but she certainly still is a huge talent, and I expect to see her definitely playing well in the pros and potentially the national team.
yeah, but then I just want to talk about Fleming of how she could pull strings from that midfield area. Of course, Stanford is a tough matchup, but then like she has a resume, right? Like 74 caps for Canada, I want to say, been playing since she was 15. That being said, flipping the script back on Stanford, that high press, is there like, do you think, can you even think of any ways or like any collegiate program equipped to kind of break that down? I know you've spoken to Abello about that right after the Stanford game as well. What do you think about their kind of like, well, what we say Jurgen Klopp kind of Gegenpress, kind of like, rock and roll, punk rock style football that goes up and down the pitch, and also really relying on some really risky high presses with some of their best players and directly converting them to goal scoring opportunities.
Yeah, definitely. Abello did say that Stanford's high press was what made the game so difficult for Penn State, and that basically when they got the ball, they could hardly do anything with it because of that pressure that Stanford was bringing. So it definitely is a huge part of their game and why they're able to kind of suffocate their opponents and just shut them down. Whenever they get the ball back, they take it forward and are able to get shots on goal, and that just makes it really hard for their opponents.
Yeah, especially with players like, again, I want to sound like a broken record. I don't think any of us want to sound like a broken record, but then with the players caliber like Macario, Haley, and Smith, especially with Smith, you look at that UCLA game, watching the majority of it, like paying more attention to the majority of it, like they made a conscious effort to try to stop or slow down Macario. That really opened space for especially Sophia Smith on the right, and well, she replied with 3 goals, just a hat trick, and very like I think it's like one of the few hat tricks in the College Cup history. Like even just looking at the Penn State matchup, right? I have the advanced statistics pulled up here. Penn State made 176 accurate passes on 66% clip. That's not good. That's kind of like of course the team was pinned back. You could kind of guess it from Stanford having 32 shots and Penn State only having 1 shot. But then it's like the production of, well, that high press, not allowing Penn State to even move the ball forward and just keeping them trapped within the back third. I would say that's most conclusive evidence, apart from the possession time, kind of like expected goals doesn't really factor into this situation anyways, because well, Penn State had 1 shot, 1 chance on the free kick as well, so that's technically a very low chance scoring directly. Sam Coffey made it close, but well, just looking at, and also statistic, lost balls in their own half. Penn State lost 41 balls in its own half, so that's kind of the indictment of how the Stanford team plays. And now, well, just to finish this up, I think we all have the same answer who's gonna win, but then in what fashion are they gonna win? Anna, do you have an answer for that?
I actually think it's going to be a really, really close game. If I had to predict what the score would be, I would want to say like 3-2, maybe even go into overtime. I don't think UNC is going to go down easily just because of the program, and they have amazing players as well. But I do think in the end, Stanford is going to win.
Madeline.
I think Stanford, of course, is going to win. 3-1 is my score prediction. I think UNC will put up a fight early, but I think in the later stages, Stanford will just take control.
Yeah, for me, I think Stanford's gonna take control. Like it could be a very similar case with the UCLA game, that it's a little bit more even match early on, but then Stanford would start to find a groove. I feel like 4-1 might be the final score, just because Stanford has not scored less. Like the only game that Stanford did not score more than 3 goals is against Penn State. Penn State basically, very, like we said, very solid at the back, withstanding huge amount of pressure, took a 2-0 loss. And when you look at the way Stanford is able to go against every single team in the country or in the NCAA tournament, I would say, and buzzsaw them basically. Like, I feel like they're capable of doing that, especially in this highest level of soccer. So, this kind of wraps up our segment on collegiate women's soccer. We still have some pro soccer stuff coming up for you guys. Stay tuned.
And we are back with another soccer segment. I'm Anna Middleton. Alongside me is Ryan Lam. And we have a special guest with us today, Madeline from the Daily Collegian. And we are going to be talking about professional women's soccer in today's segment. And I'm going to start out this segment with the English League. And Ryan, let's hear what you have to say.
All right, like the English League's kind of fun right now. Actually Chelsea was the undefeated team, going 7-1, but then Arsenal playing one more match, took an L, but then is currently atop of the leaderboard. Of course, Arsenal, when you talk about them, you can't escape talking about the Dutch players, right? Daniel van der Donk in the midfield and Vivian Miedema up front. I want to say they're playing Bristol City the past weekend, where Miedema had 6 goals and 4 assists in an 11-0 demolition. Like, how? Why? Like, how? That's some, like, USA Thailand level stuff, but then it's in the FAWSL. So, Arsenal's been solid. They've always been the upper echelon. I think they won the league last year as well. Man City came second. And it's kind of like, the different thing. Maybe we will touch on this even later when we talk about how the world's kind of catching up with the United States in women's soccer. They have the club as the backing, right? Of course, you see in the U.S. also, like, that also kind of exists. When we were looking at player info, right, trying to get a hold of some of the players to talk to them, like Portland Thorns is some form of subordinate to the Portland Timbers, kind of going off that relationship. But then we're talking about these teams, Arsenal, United, Man City, Chelsea, these type of teams. Some of them are listed on the stock exchange. They have, like, basically an uncountable amount of money, and they are able to feed those programs to get those top players in. Now, kind of going off, United, of course, my team, I kind of want to talk about them coming up from the second tier in the women's championship in its second year of existence, doing pretty well. Have a very conscious effort to boost that team with quality players, proven players. Abby McManus being one of them. They brought in Jane Ross. They brought in Jackie Hernan from who basically I think was the star of the show of that Netherlands team that reached the finals in the World Cup. But then the best player, surprisingly, very young player, still in her teens, Lauren James. She's been in charge of a bunch of goals this season, especially, like, earlier morning they played Everton. So it's the number 4 team against the number 5 team. And Lauren James has 2 goals. Everton scored in, like, the second minute, but then the team came back to win 3-1. That's my happy Manchester United fan take, because I'm going to milk this whenever I could, because I'm not always happy. But then, yeah, City's still pretty good. United lost Alex Greenwood to Lyon. Kind of a testament of how good a player she is. But then looking at the end, Liverpool, they're not well-run program. It's kind of like, if I want to compare it, dare I say, Sky Blue FC-ish. Not even going to lie. Like, they're just not well-run. I don't think the FSG, the Fenway Sports Group that owns Liverpool, has much intentions trying to develop that program with that type of name to extend them to the upper echelon of, well, the team.
Moving on from there, Madeline, I want to hear your picks on the English League. What do you have?
You could talk about one player that I know you really want to talk about in Sam Kerr moving to Chelsea. Give your takes, just takes, all
Yes.
takes here.
So obviously Arsenal, the current leader, they have their goal scorer in Miedema. But Chelsea, with the new addition of Sam Kerr, I mean, it'll be interesting to see how the top two showdown kind of goes between those two teams, because obviously we know Sam Kerr, the all-time leading goal scorer in the NWSL. Now she's finally moving on to kind of a new challenge, and because she spent most of her career in the U.S. So yeah, it will be a very fun battle to watch.
Moving on from that, I want to touch base on shrinking the gap between the United States and the international player pool. One thing we have to note is the U.S. women's national team won the World Cup. Does that mean that we have the best players, though?
I would argue, quality and depth-wise, yes. Because when you think about the 23-player squad and those who actually missed out, the player that the press, despite limited press, talked about, yeah, we like the United States still have a very good setup, a very good pipeline system in college soccer. Are there going to be changes? I don't know. I think Katarina Macario should be able to make it to the NWSL. Yes, for fun, for one, because she's going to be a really good player. But then, are we going to move it to perhaps like a junior? Like if you spend 3 years in the college soccer in the NCAA, you could be drafted. We might have to look at that. But then, when you look at it, I know you're a PSG fan, but like you definitely want to talk about the marquee example in international soccer club-wise. We're not talking about the country setup in Lyon, right? Madeline takes Lyon. How it's healthy or unhealthy, whatever you want to say about it.
Well, I know a lot of NWSL fans have kind of put Lyon under fire a little bit just because they take all these great players and they win all these games, everything, and they're the best club team in the world, but they play in a league that doesn't have a whole lot of competition. Obviously, PSG is there, but clearly not on the same level.
It's kind of like PSG in the Liga, but men's. But go on.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, and the reason they're so successful is because they have that financial backing from their club. I mean, obviously, Lyon is not the richest club in the world, but their president, Jean-Michel Aulas, he is willing to invest in the women's team, buy players, and pay them salaries that they're going to be able to live with and that they're happy with. So, I mean, at the moment, there's no clear competitor, but I think in the future, obviously you're seeing a lot of clubs in England invest more in the women's game. I mean, maybe there will be more competition.
It's kind of funny, like, when you look at Lyon, right? This team is, well, just looking at the honors, they've won 17 UEFA Champions League. They have won 17 Division 1 titles. And basically, since the UEFA Champions League kind of came around, they've bossed it. 2011, 2012, 16, 17, 18, 19. That's unfair, unheard of. Quite frankly, it's like the Celtics winning like 11 titles in 12 years. But then, like, just when you look at, say, Cascarino, he's not even getting really, really solid playing time in this setup. And the kind of funny thing is also that the current roster of Lyon, there are no American players. There have been American players. Alex Morgan played half season there. I think she got a pretty bad injury, but she won the Champions League. Hope Solo played there. I want to say Rapinoe played there for a little bit. Morgan Bryan played there. Those are kind of like the recent vintage of players. But then, like, no, they got, this year I want to say they got Lucy Bronze in. They have Alex Greenwood in. Basically, Nikita Paris. Those are the star core of, like, staples for the England team that made it pretty far gave US a little bit of a challenge, I want to say, in the semifinals of the Women's World Cup, because France was quarters, England was semis, and Netherlands was finals, right? Yeah. So, I mean, in this setup, they proved themselves to be a top team in the world without American talent. I think that says something. That is, of course, obviously never conclusive, but that could be an interesting point looking into how the world is catching up to the US.
All right, moving on to a different subject. This is very interesting, I find at least. Let's touch base on the women's Ballon D'Or is a joke and it discredits women's soccer. Now, Ryan, I know you're going to have a lot to say about this, so I'm going to let Madeline go first and see what she has to say.
She might have more to say, honestly, but oh well.
Well, I think that take is definitely interesting, and I actually agree with it because we're seeing that obviously it's a good thing that now women are being recognized in a similar way that men are, but it's always kind of been a popularity contest, and we saw that back in 2016 when Carly Lloyd won World Player of the Year for the second year in a row, and that was the same year the U.S. crashed out of the Olympics in the quarterfinals. So that caused a lot of confusion. And I believe, Megan Rapinoe won this year. And I don't think that she is undeserving necessarily because she won the World Cup, won the Golden Boot. And it's just that I don't think that without those, she would have really been in the conversation. Like, obviously,
She doesn't have any goals and assists in this NWSL season.
Exactly.
I'm just gonna put that out there.
So you don't really have that comparison of like the domestic league and internationally. And I also think 3 of her 6 goals in the World Cup were penalties, so that kind of affects it as well. So I just think that, with her receiving such an award, it maybe has to do with her being American and having been a World Cup winner.
Looking at the statistics right here I have pulled up, it says that she is famous for her activism, totaled just 339 minutes, spread over 6 games by her team, Seattle Reign FC, and during the year of 2019, having scored 0 goals and 0 assists and being eliminated in the semifinals after a 4th place in the regular round. Now, that does not sound like a winner to me.
Yeah, like, it's kind of like, of course, I very much agree with the take. Of course, that it's a trans. The origin of that, maybe we could put it in our podcast document or our description, is a translated document, and it's also Reddit, so there's a little bit of a funny take added into it, but statistics don't lie. I don't think Megan Rapinoe, like, of course, the one thing I want to quickly kind of pivot and talk about in this situation is that the allotment money in the NWSL might not be that lucrative of keeping players wanting to play and contribute, because you look at players leaving the NWSL for international soccer, even in short stints, but then also just, World Cup year, kind of like World Cup comes first, right? In that situation. And for a lot of the American players, it means that they're more willing to skip their club games, especially in this season, to prepare for something that the country collectively cares about. Because, surprise, surprise, the men's side of the U.S. Soccer Federation is even worse off in this situation. So, that being said, a lot more money, because I don't want to bore everyone down with the specifics of it, but then it's understandable why some of the players might, honestly, not care as much to some degree. In that case, in Rapinoe's case, I don't think, not even close. So you look at players that performed in the club and country level. Take Netherlands as an example. Vivian Miedema. That's already a very good counterpoint to what Rapinoe does. Of course, she's also I want to say, she's also a little bit inconsistent. Of course, in the World Cup, a lot of goals and penalties. And also, remember when she was out, I want to say quarterfinals, semifinals, the game Kristen Press came in, the team did not look that much more different. I think we have to look at that, and of course, great soccer player? Yes. I'd still say Megan Rapinoe was great, of course, towards the wrong side of the 30 as well. But in that case, that proves that the women's Ballon d'Or is a popularity contest, minus last year because Ada Hegerberg deserved it.
Yeah, I agree with that. But now I want to switch topics and go into your top 10 picks of the season. Ryan, we'll start with you.
All right, so I'll take the helm here. Let's talk a little bit about this project. Guardian does this every year. Top 100 female footballers in the world. So the recent edition came out kind of around the same time the Ballon d'Or came out. So here's who they have in the top 10. Me and Madeline and I both have our editions of the top 10, and we could talk about some of the, well, unfairness or some of the players that we think should be higher, should be a little bit lower, some of the talking points within that top 10, the top 100 as we go through. Well, we will only count out the top 10. We're not going to name all 100 players, but let's go. So for the Guardian, they have Sam Kerr, number 1, Australian international, playing for the Chicago Red Stars. Lucy Bronze, number 2. She's the British fullback, now plays for Lyon. Rapinoe, number 3, needs no explanation, needs no introduction. Force the face a little bit here and there. Ada Hegerberg, sorry. What's with me there? Ada Hegerberg, number 4. Ballon d'Or winner past year, big part of that Lyon team, but did not play for Norway this edition of the World Cup. Amandine Henry, French, holding midfielder for Lyon, number 5. Number 6, Vivian Miedema. Arsenal, Dutch striker. Rose Lavelle at number 7, needs no introductions as well. Pernille Harder, number 8, Wolfsburg. Number 9, Wendy Henard, French defender. Can play basically wherever on the pitch with that physique. And number 10, Eugénie Le Sommer, also French striker, playing for Lyon. 5 Lyon players in the top 10. Interesting. So, now I want to pass the ball to Madeline with her top 10 first. How are you going to move things around? Just read it out, kind of give some explanations. Shall you wish?
Okay. You want me to start with number 10 or number 1?
Number 10. Let's give it a little bit of theatrics here.
Okay. So at number 10, I have Lieke Martens from the Netherlands. Of course, she's been a huge part of that team for so long, and now she plays for Barcelona, which is one of the up-and-coming women's club teams in the world. And, of course, everyone remembers she won World Player of the Year in 2017, I think, when the Netherlands won the Euros. So, I mean, she's just been doing it every single year. She's just been an absolute star. She can score goals. She has assists, great technical ability, and I really like her as a player. And I think 19 is a bit too low for her. And then at number 9, I have Wendy Renard. Of course, we all know. I mean, she's been a mainstay for both Lyon and the France national team, and she's great on set pieces, great defensively. Really needs no further explanation. And at number 8, I have Vivian Miedema from the Netherlands. I mean, we just talked about her scoring 6 goals and 4 assists in one game. So, I mean, I think she's only 22 or 23 years old, somewhere around there, which is crazy for what she's doing. At number 7, I have Jennifer Marojan from Germany, and another Lyon player, of course, ranked 13th by The Guardian, which I think is a little bit low. And at 6, which is probably the biggest surprise of this,
Oh, God.
ranked at number 21 by The Guardian, I have Amel Majri at number 6 because
She's your favorite player.
yes, my favorite player in world football, basically because she can do anything. She has played at left back and at left winger. She, in my opinion, is a better left winger, but she can defend. She has such great skill on the ball. She's incredible to watch. I've gotten to see her play in person a few times, and she is amazing. She can score goals, assists. I believe she had 10 goals and 9 assists last year in the French league, and she is just incredible. So at number 5, I then have Lucy Bronze, who I'm personally not a huge fan of her, although she seems to be ranked pretty high by a lot of journalists. So I think she's obviously a great defender, but then brings a lot going forward in the attack as well. So at number 4, I then have Ada Hegerberg, the reigning Ballon d'Or winner. And she was ranked number 4 by The Guardian as well. So obviously a huge mainstay for Lyon. But the big question is her not playing for Norway, which is a questionable decision. She obviously did it because of the treatment of the women's team. But I think if she were to go back to the national team and perhaps show that she can play well at the international level again, then that would probably raise her stock a little bit. So at number 3, I have Amandine Henry, and she is just one of the most consistent players, I think, in the game throughout her whole career. She's played in the US in addition to playing in France, and everywhere she's played, she's been consistent. She can defend well in that holding midfielder position, and then also can kind of take the initiative in the attack if she needs to.
Also, I just want to come in here because I want to talk about Amandine Henry as well. I mean, a few days ago we were talking about the exact point if international soccer has surpassed the U.S. to some degree, and well, is Amandine Henry the best pure number 6 player, even center mid in the world? And the answer is
obviously yes.
So that's a very interesting point considering, well, I don't consider her as a complete 6, but Juilliard is so in contention and everything like that. But, well, go on. Number 2, number 1.
And at number 2, I have Sam Kerr, who was ranked as the best footballer in the world by The Guardian. I think her moving to Chelsea is a huge step in her career, and she'll obviously be able to show that she can succeed in multiple leagues, and she's obviously been doing it a lot for Australia, even though they had kind of a disappointing World Cup. So at number 1, this is also kind of a surprise. I have Pernille Harder from Denmark. I think she gets overlooked a lot, even though she's consistently scoring goals and just really running the attack, whether it be for Wolfsburg or for Denmark. Obviously, Denmark was in the final of the 2017 Euros, so that's kind of when she got that stage and that platform to show her ability, and she did. She did score in the final, but yeah, I still think she's underrated and is, in my opinion, the best player in the world.
Okay, so my turn. I'm kind of playing some mental gymnastics right now because I definitely have some different takes after looking deeper into some of the players and their performances this season. But then I would start with my number 10. I think Randy Renard's number 10 kind of talked about her threat as a set piece and also as a very physical center back. Could do a lot of things on the pitch. I think being a defender sometimes puts players in some form of a disadvantage, especially in this situation. I like her not as a player, but then I feel like she's she's correct right around that area. So for number 9, I have Danielle van der Donk. She's ranked number 16 in the Guardian poll. She's the she's the partner in crime with Vivian Miedema, also with a lot of great Dutch players in that World Cup one. Sharita Spitz, Jackie Gurnan, where I will personally talk about a little bit later. But I feel like her way to kind of boasts the whole midfield she could carry as an 8, but then also she has that chippiness in her that I feel like is very important in the soccer world right now. For number 8, I'm going to change it up. For number 8, I have Jennifer Marajan. Just because of the all-roundedness she possesses. Also, yes, I feel like it's a little bit unfair, but Lyon has that infrastructure, has those players around her for everyone to succeed, and that's really seen from the domination they've had. A little bit unfair, yeah, but then personal qualities do come out in that moment. Number 7, I have Roosevelt. I feel like she deserves to stay there. Of course, I think the best thing about her is that she's young. She has that stock to continuously rise, but then she has shown those like flashes of magic in like I want to compare it that way, but like being around like the Penn State program, it's stuff that Sam Coffey does. Like you watch her, you know that she's special. Even in the press box, sometimes you can't hold back that did she just do that? That kind of feeling. And I think Roosevelt has that in her level as a player. And then moving on, my screen just went off. I have Amandine Henry. I wanted to rank her higher, really, but then I feel like she's just really solid, and solid gets you places. And of course, Mala has gone through a lot of what she does for that team as well. For number 5, I want to say, number 5, I have Vivian Miedema. Goal scoring prowess, proved herself on that Arsenal setup. Previously played in Germany, I want to say. Kind of like bounced around. Of course, the big like point counting into that the Dutch national team success, 2017 Euros, 2019 World Cup, as well as her individual success for Arsenal. That's really important to me. For number 4, I have Lucy Bronze. I personally have her pretty highly ranked, just because she could do a lot of things on that right back position, especially for England as seen this year. Of course, having Nikita Paris up front really helps her out because Paris can drive inward a little bit and become a little bit of a striker role, and then Lucy Bronze would basically boss the whole right wing, but then that also proves how complete she is as a right side player, be it playing a right back, right wing back, or even sometimes pushed up to a right midfielder role, shall the team need a little bit more defense. For number 4, I have Fernille Harder. I think she's also underrated in this setup, but then Madeline's covered a lot of it. She's one of the more complete players in the offense as well. Wolfsburg might not be what it was, basically kind of like before the Lyon years, to be honest. And Denmark might not be the top-notch national team, but then her influence on both teams could not be understated. My top 3, well, Ada Hegerberg, number 3. Not playing in the national team hurt her a little bit, I will say that. And just like how it worked out for her, I hope that situation works out for the team and also for the FA with Ada, but then she's just proven to be a very good player. Number 2 player, I actually have a very, very surprising pick in Ellen White. Hot take, right? I feel like the way she carried herself, especially in that World Cup team, I really rank her highly. Might not be number 2, as I'm doing some mental gymnastics in my head, but I think she's worthy of a top 5 spot in this vote. Came in at number 14. She has those big moment performances that worked out. Of course, against the US, had that VAR return goal in the 68th minute, I want to say. I feel like Ellen White's a really good player in that setup in Manchester City as well. Number 1, Sam Kerr. Yeah, I'm just not going to provide any extra explanation to Sam Kerr's inclusion. But then I want to say a special thing about our top 10s. How many American players do we have?
I was just about to say that.
1. Yes. Just because, like, I feel like 2019 is a very special situation, especially with the NWSL being in a down year for the World Cup. Because when you think about, like, other seasons in the European soccer, it's basically from August to May. The NWSL plays through the summer. That could be a possible explanation to it, but then I think that goes to show our point that we made, that kind of talking about how this, well, like, international soccer is kind of catching up with American soccer. So, Madeline, let's talk about some of the weird stuff. Apart from you looking at me weird when I said Ellen White for number 2. What do you have, like, what opinions do you have in general of this particular list? Maybe bigger. I know you have one take of how they kind of, like, rank American players, but then also some of the other stuff that we could mention as we kind of go over and scroll down and look at some of the players' positions as well.
I think, again, a lot of American players are ranked higher than they should be, and that just kind of goes along with just the stature of the U.S. women's national team and, them winning back-to-back World Cups. I mean, it's pretty obvious that they have some serious talent, but when it comes to an individual level, I think, other players, like a Pernille Harder from Denmark, a team that isn't, they didn't even play in the World Cup, so those individual players don't get as much recognition because they don't have as much team success. And I mean, you even see Crystal Dunn at 18. I mean, she's kind of made a great transition from more of a winger position to now playing left back. But I do think that's a bit high for someone like her, especially when you have Amel Majri at 21. So
Yeah, looking at some of the players, I want to say Christine Sinclair at 28 might be a little bit low. Maybe it might be a little bit high, just because like she still has the production. She has that like historical, historical value, I guess, to the women's soccer and the development of the game. But then she's a little bit high. A lot of the American players, of course, maybe like say players like Tobin Heath, players like Alex Morgan toward the World Cup season this year, or Rose Lavelle might be a little bit more deserving, but then some of the players, like you mentioned, Crystal Dunn might not be that high. Alex Pop might be a little bit low to me looking at this at 23. Want to really touch base on Jackie Gurnan, who came in at 46. I feel like she's played in the majority of games since moving to United, but then kind of have an injury hamper her, especially moving into and just kind of collaborating with the team. I think she's a top 25 caliber player, as proved by her performance in the World Cup. Of course, that Dutch team kind of like came up all together from the youth ranks. So you have like the players like Spitzer, Gernans, and Van de Dongs of the world. That basically that midfield three is like unbeatable, and like they're like very well, maybe the French, but like they have very good chemistry. But I want to move on to one point. Of course, we could go on and on with some of those players. Listener 45, Dahl Kemper 49, Houghton 47. That's where we just kind of like looked at, but very special inclusion at number 87. Player we talked about just now, Jessie Fleming, UCLA Bruins Canada International. What do you think about her inclusion in this list as a collegiate player, the only collegiate player, and also, well, her resume internationally helping her case in this top 100 lineup?
I think it's definitely interesting that she made the list, having not even played a professional game, but definitely the fact that she has played with Canada for a while now has definitely helped that. Obviously she's not the best player in the college game. That would be Katerina Macario, but she hasn't played pro yet, so that's kind of the reason for that, I think. But I mean, personally, I probably wouldn't put her in the top 100, but I think once she plays for a professional club, maybe she would be deserving of that.
Yeah, I feel like might not be that deserving of a top 100, but then it's the same case. Yeah, I know what she did for the Canadian national team, being included, like we've said earlier, since she was like 15, but then also, well, if she's there, how's Macario not in there with her production and like how she's basically single-handedly not single-handedly, but won 2 straight Mac Herman awards. I think I'm like Mac Herman trophies. Like I think it's safe to say that now that she would win this year as well, with the way Stanford's playing and achieving that level of success as a team. So that kind of wraps up our pro women's soccer segment, unless you want me to leave like 5 minutes for you to talk about PSG. So
Yeah, obviously PSG is my club. It's not fun having to root for the women's team that plays in the same league as Lyon, obviously the best team in the world. Yeah, I mean, I think they have a lot of talent, though. They brought in some internationals as well, but they just can't compete really with Lyon. They did have that win a couple years ago, I think, in the French Cup final. That was pretty exciting, but since then, really nothing's happened. So it's just been chilling in second place.
Also, I want to give a shout out to Charlotte Williams, who we've tried to touch base with as well. She's currently playing in French Liga as well for Fleury 91 FC, I want to say. So, best of luck as we touch base on that pro international soccer stratosphere.
And that's all we will have today for our soccer segment on professional women's soccer. Thanks for tuning in for Ryan Lam and Madeline from the Daily Collegian. I'm Anna Middleton, and thank you.
All right, we're back with part 3 of the soccer podcast here, the Real football podcast, I should say. So, well, I'm Ryan Lam, and now with me, Anna Middleton is gone because she has some previous engagements. So we still have Madeline with us. We're going to talk about some men's soccer action, something that, well, we're pretty familiar with, but, well, it's not Penn State women's soccer, but let's start, just get started. Shall we talk about Bundesliga? Because that league table is mad. When we talk about, they played Mönchengladbach play against Bayern. I want to say yesterday, and Mönchengladbach won 2-1 on a final minute penalty, and they're still atop of the league, 31 points. We got Leipzig at number 2 with 30 points, Dortmund number 3, 26, Schalke number 4, 25. Freiburg number 5, 25, Leverkusen number 6, 25, and Bayern number 7, 24 points. So looking at that, 7 points separates number 1 and number 17, and the number 7th team is Bayern Munich. So, and 3 teams with 25 points. We could safely say that the Bundesliga is the most competitive league there is right now in at least the top 5 leagues of the Europe. So do you have takes on the general competitiveness? I guess all the teams, of course, the Bayerns and Leipzigs and Dortmunds of the world, of course, a lot of money, but then the other teams could still be able to compete in that Bundesliga setup.
Yeah, well, everyone likes to talk about the Premier League in England having maybe the most competition, with kind of the top 6, but I think
okay, go on.
I think the Bundesliga in Germany definitely has the most parity, obviously, as you can see right now. Bayern seems to always get it done in the end, though, but right now sitting in 7th place, even though, like you said, only 7 points behind the leaders. I mean, it'll be interesting to see, if they can come back. Obviously, they had a bit of a manager crisis.
I mean, Kovac is gone. They have Flick now, so... And I rate him, but Bayern is a different animal, especially in this German stratosphere. A team that we really enjoy talking about, be it our shared love, our shared enjoyment toward the way they play, but also how they would always somehow choke a game, is Borussia Dortmund. It wasn't the case toward in the last 2 games, but then there are some rather disappointing results. 4-0 defeat to Bayern earlier in November, 3-3 draw against Paderborn at home, Schalke is 0-0 draw, losses to Inter and Barcelona in the Champions League, and a lot of questionable draws against Frankfurt, Werder Bremen, and Freiburg, even earlier in the season. Borussia Dortmund last season, of course, kind of went neck and neck with Bayern until they collapsed later in the second half because of injuries, and also, having Diallo and Zagadou at center back, or 2 time bombs, essentially, did not help. But then now, the inconsistency issue kind of stays. What's your view on like how they set up, especially now? Like they have new players. They have your Thorgan Hazards of the world. They have Witzel so there. They have Thomas Delaney, and they kind of invested on the backline as well. Matt Hummels, Hakimi still there, and also Nico Schultz. But then still kind of in that inconsistent purgatory. Is it about the style that they play with, or what?
Honestly, I think one of the reasons why they are often so inconsistent is that they often play a lot of young players. There's not often a ton of experience in their starting lineups because they're known for developing young players, and that's just kind of part of the culture of the club. So, I mean, it's frustrating as a fan to kind of watch them just choke time and time again, but I mean, it happens, especially when you go up against teams that have, superstars and some of the best players in the world, when you go up against like a Bayern or a Barcelona. So, I mean, it happens, however frustrating it is.
Mm-hmm. The one thing I want to mention about Bundesliga is actually Timo Werner of Hasenballsport Leipzig. He's been one of the top performers. I want to say, looking at some of the stats this morning, one of the top leading scorers in Bundesliga, but then his goals plus assist numbers is crazy. I want to say he's like the number 2 player in the top 5 leagues on goals plus assist contributions. 15 goals, 5 assists, and in 14 league games this season, he had a direct contribution of goals of every 58 minutes. So that production is, to me, is unbelievable. And it's very interesting because Timo Werner has been saying he wants to leave, might be one of the biggest targets toward January or this summer. A lot of teams want him. Think he might be a fit with Liverpool, but then are you going to pull, say, a Firmino to make room for him? I don't know. United might be a fit. They kind of need a striker, not a Lukaku style striker, a very mobile style striker. And now that Werner is better in creating, might be better. But then comes the question of the Rashford, Martial, left mid consistent dilemma of who's going to play that inside forward role. So I think that's about it for Bundesliga. Now we could talk about the Premier League, which is surrounded by a mist of managers in the hot seat. Let's go through a table first as well. I thought Liverpool's league to lose, I think, by now. Well, Liverpool's 48 up on top of the league. Leicester's number 2. Best start in Premier League history for this Leicester team, even better than the year when they won the Premier League, of course, 2015-16. Leicester of 38, Man City of 32, 14 points behind Liverpool. Who would have believed that if we say it like, I don't know, before the season starts? A slew of results that did not go their way. Of course, matchup against Newcastle, where John Joe Shelby answered Kevin De Bruyne's golazo to tie him 2-2. Also, this weekend, a certain other Manchester team defeated Manchester City 2-1 at the Etihad. I'll try to not go too hard on that, but then number 4 is currently Chelsea, 29 points. United, number 5, 24. Number 6, Wolves, 24. Tottenham, 23, with number 7. Number 8, Sheffield United. There's a slew of 22-point teams as well. Arsenal is at 19 points. Let's start with Arsenal. They fired Unai Emery, former coach of your beloved team, Paris Saint-Germain. What do you think went wrong there for Arsenal? But for Emery, like personally, I rate Emery very highly as a follower of Sevilla and his success in the league, but also in the Europa League. What do you think went wrong there with Unai Emery and the setup of that Arsenal team?
Well, I think the problems were there before Emery even came in. You saw it kind of at the latter end of Arsene Wenger's tenure with the club. He just kind of lost the players, and I think the players weren't putting in the effort and just didn't seem passionate about playing for the club. So when Emery took over, he just wasn't able to fix that issue, and I'm not surprised because, when he was kind of on his way out at PSG, that was kind of the same case. You had a huge personality like Neymar in there, and he couldn't do anything about it. So, as a coach, Unai Emery, I mean, yeah, he did have success at Sevilla, and at PSG he was okay, I guess. I wasn't.
That's the expectation, right? To win the league
Yeah,
every
I mean,
year.
you're
Try to
not.
crack the Champions League code.
Yeah, I mean, you don't play in a hugely competitive league in Liga, but I mean, in the Champions League, obviously that huge collapse against Barcelona, that is gonna forever like mark his career there. Um, but yeah, I mean, I think the problem with Arsenal is just that the players don't have the attitude. You can see it with, when you saw Granit Xhaka walking off the field and just like taking his jersey off, and the fans were obviously booing him because he was walking, and that's also not a good thing. So, I mean, yeah, I don't know how they're gonna fix those issues. I don't know if a coach can.
Yeah, like looking right now, Freddie Ljungberg's in charge. They did not have a good performance against Brighton. That was a 2-1 loss. They will be playing West Ham tomorrow afternoon, so Monday afternoon at 3. Might be a question for them, but then I feel like the biggest question right now is the set of the team. Apart from, well, Unai Emery did not have control of the team coming in, and also there are rumors about him, like, well, not being good at English, lack of communication with your subordinates. That would never work out. Mark that down. But then also just like, well, the team's very weird, right? One of the slowest defense in the Premier League, I want to say. Bellerin's fast, but, well, like, who else? Like, Socrates is not the fastest center back. David Luiz, we all know what he could do. You're one of his victims here from his Paris days. Kolasinac is a tank, so not that fast. I think Tierney might be a turning point for them, but then that defense needs fixing up. And the funny part with the midfield is that there's no linkage. Xhaka is back in the lineup, so he's your defensive midfield. You have Torreira kind of running around, trying to save. Like, people were saying, like, when Torreira or Guendouzi or when both of them plays, they are the midfield of Arsenal. There's no one else. And they could only do so much as the lone player kind of responsible for moving the ball around. And then you have Özil, who lingers up front. So, and it's inconsistent, I'll give you that. So, the way I described it is that Arsenal is playing in a 4-1-1-1-3. Very distinct. Xhaka, Torreira, and Özil. Of course, switch your pieces in and out shall you want, but then that's without the linkage. And the biggest problem is that they made big money signings. Aubameyang, Lacazette, Nicolas Pepe. They're the same player, right? Like Lacazette was slower. Like you said, it's more of like a center forward now compared to his Lyon days when he had that pace. They're the same players. Am I wrong? Like, why? Like the level of Arsene Wenger is famous for his spending smartly, right players, scout well. Of course, not who he's used to be right now, but then like as he stepped down, but then continuously questionable style of like making purchases and allowing players to stay on a team where a player like Aaron Ramsey gets to leave, a player like Jack Wilshere, who might even be a good piece on that team, is currently playing for West Ham. Arsenal, like, it's going to take time. It's going to be painful. Arsenal is a club I really respect as a United fan, and it kind of pains them to see them like that. So, let's move on. From North London to North London. Also, Brendan Rodgers signed a 5-year deal with Leicester City. So, Arsenal still looking for a new coach, because that was the big name idea. Or they were talking to the River coach, apparently, but he wants to go to Barcelona, and that might open up soon. So, more on that later. Spurs, North London neighbors, Jose Mourinho. Yeah, it's your turn. I have a lot of takes on Jose Mourinho, but so I'll let you go first. Of course, very polarizing type of coach. Might not agree with his style or what he does, but what do you have on Mourinho making a comeback? Well, basically a season's turnover into another Big Six Premier League team.
Yeah, I think it's definitely interesting to kind of see him back, especially in the Premier League. Obviously, his time at Manchester United was a little rocky, but so far at Spurs, it's been pretty good, except for losing to Manchester United, of course. But I think it's a good change for the club, and just to kind of see where it goes. Obviously, they haven't won trophies.
They haven't won anything.
Yeah, so I mean, even despite playing in the Champions League final, I mean, they just kind of lacked that ability to just succeed at the highest level, and really win those trophies. So, I mean, I don't know. I mean, they definitely need to kind of improve in the transfer market. So we'll see if Mourinho can kind of help with that.
hmm I feel like just quickly, I think you've mentioned one of my main points is that they haven't won trophies. They're kind of like stuck at the bottleneck with Mauricio Pochettino right now. So understandable that they might have to let him go. Jose Mourinho has a different outlook in soccer, I feel like. Definitely more attacking instead of fighting for those 1-0 wins in most part of his tenure. So understand that move. Of course, a big name coach always helps kind of command the team as well. Soccer, Everton, I'm just going to personally very briefly run through it. Of course, one of the worst teams record-wise in Premier League, ranked number 25th according to 538's SPI, Soccer Power Index. So a little bit weird, but hey, change the coach. Duncan Ferguson, club legend, came in, has that kind of like Ole Gunnar Solskjaer kind of bump, and well, beat Chelsea 3-1 in the first game. So that's an interesting situation to monitor if they're going to look for a new coach or, well, have Duncan Ferguson ride it out and see how it goes. Now let's talk about United. Of course, have been tumultuous since Fergie's gone. Now Solskjaer is in. Up and down, of course, had that honeymoon period, but then very, very unsatisfactory results until very recently. Heard rumors that he might be gone if he loses to both Tottenham and Man City. 2 wins came out of those like situations that are pretty dire. So what do you think about this situation? Of course, having that club legend in, but then also like, can we do better? Like that's the biggest argument within Manchester United's setup, right? Can we do better with the manager's position? But then the team seems to like Solskjaer. Kind of how do you balance that? Of course, the 2 positive results recently as well tells you that the team has that quality.
Well, I think it's obvious that the team can do better, and if I were, the Manchester United,
Ed Woodward out. Go on. Glazers out. Go on.
I think it might serve them right to look for a better manager. Obviously the season hasn't gone the way they've wanted, but the response has been pretty emphatic with those 2 wins, of course. And I do want to talk about that game yesterday against Manchester City. I mean,
The one where I almost I will not say it on air, but go on.
I mean, that was a really impressive performance from a team that just is consistently underwhelming. So just to go up 2-0 and then to kind of keep the fight and sustain
Play
that.
it out. And
Yeah, I expected them to just choke, and I thought, it might end 2-2. Maybe City would actually even win it. But the way they kind of held on and just, that tenacity to keep defending and to have numbers behind the ball and to just kind of thwart every single attack from Manchester City, that was really impressive. And, maybe they'll be able to climb the table again, but we'll see.
yeah, especially in this situation where the team's still a little bit inconsistent, a little bit fresh. Pogba's out, for the better or for worse. You never know with him. You have players like McTominay and Fred really playing well now in the center midfield. Do you want to mess with that? Maybe, because Pereira's a little bit questionable. Jesse Lingard's always a little bit questionable. If you can incorporate Paul Pogba in that 10 row instead of like taking up spaces that McTominay or Fred would usually play. I can't believe I'm saying this right now. McTominay and Fred might be our best midfield partnership. But then also there are some good signs. Brandon Williams looks good. Luke Shaw's making a comeback, has some good matches. Aaron Wan-Bissaka, I feel like one of the premier fullbacks, especially not making mistakes. Harry Maguire's been good, so you never know. And Daniel James, who said you can't find good talent from lower leagues.
I just want to ask, what do you think Paul Pogba's future at Manchester United is?
I think he's going to come back late December, as predicted. Try out at that 10 role in front of McTominay and Fred. See what he does. If there's a lucrative offer by January or by the summer, I'm not opposed to selling him. Knowing that that money you could recoup, if you spend it smartly, you could patch up the attacking midfielder role. You can bring in some backup strikers, because backup striker right now is Mason Greenwood. And I would like a little bit more stability on that front. Invest on more youth, because there's a lot of, like, Manchester United always have youth coming up. You want to lock them up and not have another Paul Pogba incident happen again. So it's kind of like, I don't mind him going, but he's still a world-class player in my mind. Especially for France. All right, so I feel like we could talk about a little bit about La Liga, but then is there anything special happening apart from Atletico Madrid not winning a match in like 1 month?
Yeah, that's my other team, Atletico Madrid, and they're also frustrating to watch because they can't score goals and they're drawing against mediocre teams, even though La Liga is also one of it is a pretty competitive league, I think, other than, of course, Barcelona kind of being that dominant force at the top. But yeah, I mean, a team that won the Europa League a couple seasons ago and, you know, has challenged Barcelona at the top of the table, I think it's pretty disappointing despite, you know, having some big signings over the summer.
Yeah, and especially like the thing about Spain, like Spanish football, is like, of course now everything's back to normal. Real and Barcelona's up top, 34 points apiece, 1 and 2. And, well, you have teams that are really good at home, that always kind of lingers in the 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 range, like your Sevillas in the world, very good at home. Your Athletic Bilbao in the world, very good at home. And there's teams like, Real Sociedad had a pretty good push, pretty good jump. But then, yeah, I mean, La Liga should be fun, but then it always ends up at Barcelona, Real Madrid, now that Atletico's drop out. Let's talk about how boring the Serie A is. Inter's up on top, 38. Juventus, 36. Lazio, 33. Cagliari, 29. Roma, 29. Atalanta, 28. Napoli, disappointing season, 21 at 7. Milan's currently playing 20 points at 9. Parma's 21 points at 8. It's mainly because, well, Juve took his first loss of the season against Lazio. Sergei Milinkovic-Savic has a great go. Luis Alberto has a really good game. 2 assists this game. And Ciro Immobile actually missed a penalty. I think Immobile is one of the highest performing players. 17 goals, 5 assists. He's the number 1 player actually in top 5 leagues with like goals and assists in total. So like goals involvements. Number 2 is Verna. So in this case, I mean, Inter's proved to be a very tough team, especially under Antonio Conte. Now, Inter Rome, I remember I was watching that game. I was talking to you because, well, Friday afternoon, nothing to do. College Cup's coming up next, so we're just talking. And it feels like a Burnley-Newcastle game in a cold Tuesday night in Burnley, in Turf Moor. And that's kind of like the problem of Italy, right? Pace is a little bit slow. They are starting to get like those quality players coming in. Of course, Dybala's predominantly Italian from his Palermo days. And then like your Ronaldo's of the world, Lukaku's of the world, Sanchez of the world. Toward the older side, yes, but then still quality. How do you think they could kind of solve that issue? Especially, well, not a lot of players want to play in Italy right now something that we might touch on later very briefly.
I think it's about bringing in some of the more exciting young players in the world to the league. Obviously, you mentioned Ronaldo and Lukaku, who aren't exactly like those phenoms that you'd want to see, but I think just kind of bringing in, younger players kind of, I would compare that to kind of how Jadon Sancho went over to the Bundesliga. That whole situation, you have those players who are like up and coming stars, and I think that could maybe help with the speed of play and things like that.
Yeah, so I mean, like bouncing off that, biggest news this weekend in soccer, or this week in soccer in general, of course, an Italian newspaper started off their coverage of Inter Rome, one of the marquee matchups, with, well, a very unfortunate title of Black Friday, denoting Chris Smalling and Romelu Lukaku, both United players, formerly, being, well, very solid parts on their teams and debatably star players. And now another incident came up in England over the weekend in the United City game, where a City fan was spotted mocking Fred as he's taking Fred and are both debatably Jesse Lingard, as they're taking a set piece late toward the game. So, I mean, I feel like the situation, like people were talking about this racism situation in football, of course, a lot more now. Italy has a very weird attitude about it, basically flat out denying it at times. Might not be the best course of action, but then what do you think? What do you think they could do to solve this? Especially, like, we know it exists everywhere, Italy being a prevalent example. But what do you think they could do about this situation? Because, like, frankly speaking, like, no matter what your beliefs is, this should not be happening in the year of our Lord 2019.
Yeah, for me, the problem is that they're not really imposing sanctions on, the clubs and wherever this racism is coming from. It's been about campaigns and just like taking pictures with a banner on the field of like, say no to racism, and that's great and all, but like if you don't punish clubs or punish fan groups for, this racist behavior, nothing's really going to change, and it's just continued, despite everything that they've tried to do. So I just think that, the FIFA and, any federations need to just take more action in that sense.
Yeah, like sanctions. That's the most direct way to do it. Of course, there's stuff like, oh, you play in an empty stadium, you get fined whatever dollars. But then sometimes it's like those actions does not matter to the clubs that are on the top of the league, on the top of like the world, basically. Some of the more influential like influential brands in the world in sports and soccer. I mean, it's just kind of like a dead end. Of course, education is important. You see that all over the pitch. Is that effective? You'll never know because it's hard to reach through every single generation. Like personally, I'm from a little bit more of a conservative background, like being from like Southeast Asia, and I understand how people could still have that kind of stigma going into our current generation. They don't have the like means to information, blah blah blah, all that excuses that people can make for them. But then in this, like I feel like frankly, even if you look at war situations in Russia or Ukraine, where players are, well, tearing up or getting sent off for their actions against the racial abusers, like there's something need to be due to like make the change. And like I think it had like, as much as FIFA has been crappy about doing stuff and actually punishing people, they really have to take the initiative and take a big step in this situation, just to like make it right. Because like, well, this is clearly not right in this situation. One final thing, we're gonna have to talk about this. 30 MLS teams are coming. They're announcing a new team, makes the total 30. Very distinct, different situation. With the international leagues, of course, playoff system, no relegation, salary cap. Is it time for the United States, for the MLS to seriously look at switching to somewhat of an European traditional soccer setup?
I think so. I am kind of surprised that they have not implemented promotion and relegation yet. I think that should be a staple in every league around the world. And going back to the 30 teams, I mean, the United States is a big country, so you kind of want every
Market.
represented. But I mean, especially if you're not having the promotion and relegation, it's just kind of like, I don't know. It just seems a little bit, it deviates from kind of the traditional setup, which I think works and is just good.
Hmm. And also, just looking at it, of course, that stemmed from the American like professional sports setup in general, but that's very much like internal and an internally American thing, or very limited other countries. We look at football, almost, so like football, like American football, not football we're talking about, but that's exclusively American, basically. Few Europeans here and there, Canadians maybe. Baseball, Latin America, the U.S. still pretty dominant. Japan maybe, and hockey. Yeah, that's probably the bigger sport, but then it's also smaller scale in America compared to like your Canada's, your Norway, Sweden's of the world. And the identical thing about like all those like major sports here, like NBA as well, they have a limited talent pool, right? They have to draft. They have to wait for the draft. They have to get players from the universities or stuff like that in general. And for soccer, because there's no possible way you could only limit the pool of players to your local players. Of course, the draft, the super draft, that's how they work. But you cannot possibly limit it to only it because it's a free flowing market, like how soccer works. Or else, like Atlanta would have got Joseph Martinez or yours, Miguel Amirongs or Ezequiel Barco, who surprised everyone by going to Atlanta as well. So, like, with now the teams kind of like expanding and the talent pool being a little bit more slanted, maybe one way or the other, it's a little bit more diluted. They should really look at promotion, relegation, and maybe considering the conferences, because that's a very solid part of like, oh, how are you gonna battle it out? And I understand they're looking at, or did they already do it, ditching conferences for the playoffs and just like do it by like general records and seedings. But I feel like for American soccer to take a step forward, which they direly need, especially considering what we just talked about, even in the men's part, like, not good. They have to kind of bridge the gap between U.S. soccer and the international soccer. The way to start it is, well, just do it the traditional and the successful way that other clubs prove to do it. Well, this about wraps it up. This is a doozy of a podcast, as I say. Well, Anna Middleton is left for Madeline. I'm Ryan Lam. Thank you very much for listening. There's a lot of content. We hope to do it soon. Might have you call it in France next semester. You never know. This has been the first episode of the Real Football Show on PSSN. Thank you very much. Follow us on social media. We'll have all those information, some of the links of stuff we talk about in the podcast description. Until next time.